Good evening, everybody. I am Professor Lisa Ramos. I am the Raza Heritage Month Chair and also the Program Coordinator for the San Antonio College Mexican American Studies Program. We're so honored to have you all here today. We have this really exciting event. I've been waiting months for this to happen, so I can't believe it's actually here. The name of our month is Raza Heritage Month presents Raza Reflections, Reckonings, and Resiliency. And our month is actually going to go a little bit over a month. We're having events from September 15th through October 20th. And someone will post in the comments in a little bit the link so you can see our full calendar of events. So today's event is called Afro-Mexican Verdades and Black Mexican American Truths. It is an intimate reading and dialogue about Blackness, healing, and queerness with poets Alain Pelaez Lopez and Ariana Brown. Before we begin, I would like to read a land acknowledgement. For those who don't know, a land acknowledgement is an Indigenous protocol to show gratitude to Indigenous peoples who've been living and working on these lands for thousands of years. We want to thank the Indigenous caretakers of this land. We acknowledge that San Antonio College and San Antonio, Texas occupy Indigenous lands. We acknowledge the Payaya people of Yanaguana, as San Antonio was known to them and is known to their descendants, and acknowledge the Tappilam Coahuiltecan Nation, who are native to what we now call South Texas and Northeast Mexico. We also acknowledge the Carrizo Comecrudo Nation, whose traditional territory we are also living on. Finally, we acknowledge other Native nations within Texas, whom various settler colonizer societies forcibly displaced from their native territories. As past, present, and future caretakers and knowledge keepers of this land, we are committed not only to acknowledging these Indigenous lands and Indigenous peoples, but also to addressing and deconstructing our own privileges and internalized settler colonizer thoughts and behaviors. We respectfully ask for permission to teach, learn, and grow on these lands. Over the next month, we will strive to counter the doctrine of discovery, which for too long has dismissed Indigenous peoples, African peoples, and other peoples of color, with stories and practices of survival, strength, and resilience. So I ask now that those of you who are joining us, if you could give a big San Antonio bienvenido, welcome to Alain Pelaez Lopez and Ariana Brown. So if you want to just say how excited you are or post in the comments, please do so they can see your comments. We are honored to have them, and we're here to listen and to learn from their journeys. We're going to start with Alain Pelaez Lopez. So I'm going to read their bio, and then I'm going to turn it over to Alain so they can read their poems. Alain Pelaez Lopez is an Afro-Indigenous poet, installation, and adornment artist from Oaxaca, Mexico. They are the author of Intergalactic Travels, Poems from a Fugitive Alien by The Operating System, publication year 2020. A finalist for the 2020 International Latino Book Award. And they are also the author of To Love and Mourn in the Age of Displacement by Nomadic Press, publication year 2020 as well. They've been building and working with queer and trans undocumented migrants for 10 years and is currently based in Oakland, California. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Alain Pelaez Lopez to read their poems.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Profe. My name is Alain, and I'm excited to be here and join you in a digital space. I'll be reading poems from both of my collections and then maybe two pieces that are not from those collections. The first collection, Intergalactic Travels, traces my life experience growing up undocumented in the US, and the ways in which my Blackness, queerness, and indigeneity all kind of make undocumented life feel quite unbearable, but still quite beautiful. And I want to start with the opening poem from that collection. Before the poem begins, there's a quote from the Smithsonian Museum, and I'll read it out loud. In the 16th century, New Spain, as Mexico was then called, probably had more enslaved Africans than any other country in the Western Hemisphere. Blacks were present as slaves of the Spaniards as early as the 1520s. And then it transitions into the poem. And to think that once I thought we were lucky to trace the maps of our names to sailors and warriors. Where you found honor, we found our owners. Where you found 1/3 Portuguese, 2/3 Spanish, we found 1/3 Indian slave, 2/3 African slave. Where you found roots, we found genocidal routes. And to think that once I thought we were lucky to trace the maps of our names to sailors and warriors. Where you found an archive of extraordinary stories. We found our ancestors kidnapped, transported, and enslaved. Where you found romantic cities, we found occupation, plantations, and water pollution. Where you found mestizaje, we found an attempt at total elimination. Sometimes I dream of no transatlantic slave trade, and I try to imagine no settlement, no last names, no Spanish, no Dutch, no English, no Portuguese, no Italian, no, but I do, and I become illegal. So that's the first poem, and it kind of, positions how I think and work through the history of slavery, the history of mestizaje as a white supremacist notion in Mexico, and my migration. And now I'm going to read Sick Water. I am 6 years old, and it is Tuesday. Mama Maria's only morning off of work. The lower half of my stomach has been hurting for days. I do not tell Mama. I am sure it is another worm that will make its debut during a visit to the bathroom. If I am lucky, it won't hurt. I will push my stomach hard when I sit down until I feel the worm making its way out. And with my right hand, I will pull it out as fast as I can. This is how illegal Black Indians take care of themselves. Some of us left home partly because of the plantations that our family could no longer work in, because all of us kids were dying and they needed to care for us. Our lungs too black of pesticide, our stomachs too fat with worms, our bodies collapsing from dehydration. No water for anyone in the village. Though we live on the coast, but even the gringos own our water. I am 6 years old, and it is Tuesday afternoon. My illegal Black Indian body falls to the ground. I wake up to the school nurse telling me that I must go home. Mama Maria works 4 trains, 2 buses, and a 20-minute walk away. Mama Maria never shows up. Boss didn't let her leave, perhaps threatened to report us to ICE. I am 6 years old, and it is Tuesday evening. My first trip to American Doctor since the crossing. American Doctor yells at Mama Maria in a funny language. Mama Maria yells back in Spanish. I am told to leave the room. Outside, the translator comes to me and tells me not to be scared. Maybe that there are things living inside me and that I have anemia and that I need to eat more. I tell her it's the fruit and the water. She laughs, tells me I am not in the Dominican Republic. I am not Dominican, and assures that all fruits in America are good for me, that all water is clean. I do not believe her. I am 6 years old, and it is Tuesday night. Mama Maria disconnects the phone, closes the door 3 times, locks the windows, and tells me, Cuando tengas que ir al doctor, dime, yo te curo. I wonder if the doctor asked for our papers. Probably wanted to know where we come from. Maybe she never seen a Black Indian from North America with a stomach full of all the wrong things. At least she didn't call La Migra. Thank you. This next piece I'm going to read is from my chapbook, To Love and Mourn in the Age of Displacement. And this chapbook, I put it together when I got really sick. And I guess from that moment, started identifying as disabled. And most of the pieces are about how we fail and succeed in showing up for each other as targets of the state. And this piece that I want to share is titled Alma Minerva Chacon. And it is a found poem. That means that it uses only words that I found. And I found all these words in an article in Latina Magazine. Once she reached the hospital, nurses repeatedly begged the sheriff's staff to allow them to unchain the mother. But they refused, and Chacon was forced to give birth while still shackled to the bed. Nurses repeatedly begged the sheriff's staff to allow them to unchain the mother. At one point, the nurse asked for them to release her so that she could be escorted to the bathroom for a urinalysis. But even that request was denied. Nurses repeatedly begged to unchain the mother. Still chained to the bed, Arpaio's police staff refused to allow Chacon to hold her newborn baby, and then warned her that if no one came to pick up the child within 72 hours, she would be turned over into state custody. Unchain the mother. Unchain the mother. Unchain the mother. Unchain the mother. Unchain her. This piece is in response to an over 5-year legal battle that Alma Minerva Chacon went through in order to receive a state apology, which was not a state apology for the dehumanization that she was put through. Organizers actually didn't really know about her case until years after it happened. And once her story began to reach national media, particularly via the help of undocumented youth from Arizona, it was that her battle actually took main stage and had people across the US fighting for her. I don't share this piece lightly. I share this piece with a lot of anger, and also every time I share it, I want to ask us what our commitment is to those whose stories we do not know, and if we are willing to fight for those whose stories we don't know. And the next piece I'm going to read is also from that chapbook, and it is titled Mourning, the act of imagining and rebuilding home. What do you do when a WhatsApp message appears and the number is not in your phone book? And what do you do when that message says, Abuela has passed away, it has already been buried? And what do you do when you cannot travel back to that country, that state, that pueblo, that home, that land? And what do you do if you do not know how to cry or ache and then cry? And what do you do when the poem does not come because the memories are no longer there? And how do you deal with having been undocumented for 17 years and not have said goodbye? And why can't Google fucking have an answer, a diagnosis to why you do not feel the pain? And when will sitting in a dark bedroom with a laptop and Word documents stop replacing bodies? And why is it that the first time you take an interest in mezcal is 3 months after her death when you Google best mezcal in San Francisco for under $50? It's funny how you think you can replace a body with gastronomy. Mezcal doesn't resurrect. A body is not mezcal. A poem is not mezcal. Mezcal plus poem does not equal abuela. I didn't start drinking that night. But damn right, I did don drank. Label read Nuestra Soledad, 100% agave, Oaxaca, México. Bottled at origin. Funny how in this empire, liquor can travel, but the Black and Indigenous body cannot. At least distributors didn't forget the accent on Mexico's E, like I forgot all the memories of my fraternal abuela. I know all the excuses, but I refuse to give absent father, former father, the power to fade old childhood memories. I finally visited my pueblo and abuela's home. Her mother is still alive with dementia. She remembered me after 18 years of absence. I finally visited my pueblo, often reminded myself that I was no ghost or in a REM cycle. It's difficult to believe you are home when you have been displaced for so long. I finally visited my pueblo, saw photos of abuela, her ama, and her abuela for the first time. These photos, these poems are how I recuperate home. I finally visited my pueblo and made sure I brought it with me. There is an altar as proof. There is a poem as proof. Abuela, I was shown a photograph of your abuela. She carries a medicine pouch on her neck. It was exposed over her típica. Did you ever ask her if it was intentional? Abuela, there is an altar in my room, an offering to your abuela. Have you spent time with your abuela while visiting me? Isn't it beautiful that the three of us can reunite during Sunday evening ceremony? Abuela, there is an altar in my room, an offering to your abuela. This is how the pueblo taught me to reassemble home. Abuela, there is an altar in my room, an offering to your abuela. Are you comfortable in our home? Is there anything that you need? Thank you. I appreciate y'all for witnessing these poems with me. It can sometimes feel weird to read poems alone in your office. But, today it feels good. I'm in my body and I haven't read this much poetry in some time. So thank you for the time and the space. This next piece that I'm going to read was recently published, and I have a really special relationship to it. Trigger warning, it's me thinking through what happens if I die in the recent future, particularly on the basis of my Blackness and my gender or lack of gender. So here we go. And it's titled, On the Occasion That I Die Before I'm 30. On the occasion that I die before I'm 30, go through all my photos and release the nudes. Search the notes section of my phone and click on addresses. The third one from the top. Go there with a dozen spoiled eggs and aim for the second balcony. Throw 8 eggs and throw the remainder at the other balconies to avoid suspicion. Tell everyone that the first time I made love to a happy trail, I was 17 in a cemetery. Ask my mama to adorn me in her pearl necklace. She'll know which one. Tell all my exes that I never stopped loving their trifling asses, but don't you dare invite them to any celebrations. Walk through the richest neighborhood you can find and steal their potted plants. Bring them to the service and gift them to all the guests. The dress code for 15 days following my death will be lace. Anyone who doesn't follow through never learned how to love me. Serve sour gummy worms, Kit Kats, and hot Cheetos as the appetizer. Pork belly and pineapple skewers as the main dish. And red velvet cheesecake for dessert. I want Ivy Queen's Yo Quiero Bailar as the opening prayer. If you must start a GoFundMe, only allow it to be to book City Girls the main entertainment. I want her for 3 days in a row. In the closing remarks, there must be no mention of my migration or bravery. If anyone reads poetry, let it only be an ode to green tea donuts. When they finally decide to put away my body, spray rose water on my corpse, pick up the oldest bottle of mezcal you can find, and place it inside my casket. On the occasion that I die before I'm 30, remember that I was more than papers. Remember that I was more than gender. Remember that I was more than flesh. On the occasion that I die, before I'm 30, call me a lover. Call me a hoe. Call me a dancer. Call me your kin. Call me yours. Call me yours. Call me yours. Thank you. That was on the occasion that I die before I'm 30. All right, so this is my second to last piece. It's titled A Daily Prayer. This is my sister's favorite poem. Also, my sister is a freshman in high school. She's one of my biggest advocates since she was probably 5. A Daily Prayer. God wears glow-in-the-dark acrylic nails. Her favorite color is obsidian black. She's lactose intolerant and is tired of femme exploitation. God buys gold hoop earrings at Dollar Tree and ain't afraid to wear eyelash extensions for 2 weeks straight, even if the package reads, "one time use only." God says hi to everyone the moment she boards public transit, and after she's seated, she speaks loudly into her phone while munching on some takis. God carries a plastic bag with quarters, pennies, and her passport because she knows most of her followers ain't shit, and removal proceedings are always already a possibility. God orders $1 fries, $1 cheeseburgers, and $1 drinks at fast food restaurants because the girl needs to live, and sometimes thriving looks like surviving. God checks her eyebrows on her phone every 2 hours and licks her index finger to realign each hair particle before meeting up with the girls. God walks into Metro PCS every 3 days for water damage services because she's too often weeping unto her android the deaths of Black girls. God has hired a personal stylist. She don't know no more how to be simultaneously ready for a funeral, a court hearing, a birthday celebration, an anniversary dinner, and the club all in the same day. God has a Twitter account with 36 followers, and it's aight because she follows 794,000 folk, and they all Black femmes, and the 36 that follow her hold her so that she can hold the rest of the world. Thank you. That's for my sister, my mom, and my best friend, Jacelia. Okay, so the last piece I'm reading is also from my book, Intergalactic Travels. It's actually a handwritten journal entry. For those of you who are not able to see, I just held up the book and showed 2 pages, and the 2 pages just had my handwriting in it. So I'm going to be reading these 2 pages. The first poem I ever wrote was in Spanish. I was in the 3rd grade. My mother came to hear me recite the piece. When I finished, all the mothers stared at me in confusion. See, the poem was about my desire to be a seahorse because I wanted to give birth. Although my mother was concerned that her son wanted to be pregnant, she encouraged my poetry. I believe that the poem offered my mother parental relief. Despite crossing a border, my mind was still able to imagine a future outside of our material reality. My mother was my first poetry teacher, and for that, I am grateful. Her gift to me was an excess of vision. My mother's vision for our survival was to cross the border So we did. My mother's vision for life was marked as illegal. In other words, those who have an excess of vision are punished by the law. I think this happens because our visions interrupt settler futures. This reasoning has given me hope. The more of us that lean into our illegality, the more we envision. Some may call this a hallucination or tragic hope. I call this poetry. I call this a future. I call this an elsewhere, one that is shaped by all those who this empire tried to undo. Thank you so much for bearing witness to my poems. I am so excited to hear a dear friend, Ariana Brown, who has transformed my life, who I am eternally grateful for always pushing me. I don't think that she knows that her work pushes me to one, be a better poet, but also two, to be a more cautious and conscious and caring poet. So, I know Ariana's gonna get introduced, but I just had to say a little something. I'll see you all at the Q&A.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you, Alain, for sharing your stories and your journey and your family. We heard a lot about family in there, and I know that your poems touched so many of us. I was reading the comments as you read, so thank you so much. I can't wait for the Q&A. Before we go to the Q&A, I'm excited, super excited to introduce our next guest, Ariana Brown. So Ariana Brown is a queer, Black, Mexican-American poet from the south side of San Antonio, Texas. She has 2 ethnic studies degrees and can moonwalk better than anyone in this YouTube space. Ariana started writing and slamming as a teen, competing in youth poetry slams in Austin and San Antonio. She writes a lot about what it's like to exist in her body and how to unlearn the shame that sometimes comes with it. She is low-key a curandera and high-key the youngest abuela you will ever meet. So without further ado, please help me welcome Ariana Brown.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the new interpreter who's here with us. We appreciate you. I'm super excited and I'm super emotional after hearing Alain's set. I hope everybody was listening and holding and caring. And if you enjoyed Alain's work, I definitely recommend buying their books because they're wonderful and they're awesome. Buy one for you and one for someone you care about. Okay, I am gonna try to do poems now. I'm super excited to be here. I'm not in San Antonio right now, but I miss it a lot. Earlier this year, I published my first chapbook, my first little book of poetry. As you can see, it's the same cover art as the wall behind me. So I thought that I would start tonight by sharing some of the poems from the chapbook, which is mostly spoken word poetry. And then towards the end, I'll share some of the newer poems I've been working on for my next manuscript project. So I want to start with a poem. We were talking about, Alain was speaking a lot about family. I want to start with a poem I wrote thinking about my cousin Micah, who sometimes lets me braid her hair. We've picked a color to make her happy. Honey blonde or burgundy, a hollering red, blissful obsidian, a dreamy lavender. After the wash and waking of each strand with something to keep moisture, I touch the scalp with ease, bring only good gifts, and listen to the singing in my lower back, neck, arms, and wrist when I conjure the soles of these digits to practice. My pinky gives me the most pain when I am braiding, shouts at its bend, tying yarn or kanekalon at the square root of someone's head, someone who I love, and my shoulders hunch in defiance, and my forehead oils itself anew, and my knees bring their grievances to the top of the bloodstream, and here is my body, wilting in reverence. If I could, I would destroy every memory of standing in a mirror with brush and head half done, the feeling of needing help, and no one to ask for it. I don't know what the world expects of little Black girls, but it isn't freedom to know oneself intimately, to take pleasure in our mini transformations, grow 18 inches of weave in the span of a few hours, and be recognizable only to those who love us whole and consistently. I make braids or conversation, and the head I'm working leans and aches. We cue a movie, coo a humble song to lift the lungs, and ours is a texture architectural, mimicking the forest and its triumphant green. I take the shape of trees. I am as old as the unshed leaf. Every spruce, cedar, and pine is showing off for me, and all my sisters deserve the sun's reach, the wind's kiss and howl atop the scalp. Proof we are the earth's earliest kin, shape-shifting for protection. And when we are done, I slip each end through a candle's light, or cloth and burning water, small flame prayer sent up in smoke, or sealed and soaking in the center of my hands. This I learned, this I taught myself, a secret I pass to all I love who mirror me. I don't know what the world expects of little Black girls, but we never did this to be beautiful, though we did become so in the process. It's my first poem. It's called We Never Did This to Be Beautiful. I'm going to share, thank you for the kind words. I'm going to share a poem that I don't read a lot. But if you are in San Antonio, you've grown up in San Antonio, or you've lived there, you know that cumbia is really important to us. When I was growing up, the cumbia kings were always on the radio everywhere you went, any party you were at the mall, they were just on all the time. And I didn't understand Spanish well, but I knew the chorus to all the cumbia king songs. And years later, I ended up writing this poem called Cumbia, that's sort of about my relationship to the genre. So here we go. My friend asks if I know how to cumbia and offers his hand on the dance floor. I'm an introvert, baby caterpillar, little bug who forgets she has a body. Sometimes. I think of my grandmother, who's always trying to get me to dance, always speaking to me in Spanish, hoping I'll understand, who wants me to be as free as I deserve in this lifetime. I think I've been to 3 quinceañeras in my life, 1 Mexican wedding, countless parties at my tia's house, chapel of red cups and swaying blood. My friend asks if I know how to cumbia, and I remember the shuffled feet, sudden turns, bodies dripping slow as smoke onto shoulders, drinking in memories of better days, linked kneecaps holding up what they've got left to give to the music. Or I remember couples who move like warm honey, fast as an argument, stilted swagger, banter pattern, like they're chasing each other toward the last bit of love at the corner of the backyard. My mom taught me to cumbia once, cleared a space big enough for my father's ghost to join and put Pandora on shuffle. Here goes. At first, she danced alone to show me the steps. Then, her hands were invitations, and our knees were locked and safe between each other, and we stumbled and stitched a memory onto the living room carpet. I know she would have liked to hold my father this way, but this was a kind of joy, too, forged by pressing into the body what words cannot do, and you can't tell me there aren't many ways to be religious, to have found a spirit and woke the limbs for a precious visit. I bore my heels into the floor and danced with my mother, who in another life is dancing with my father. And when she spins me around, she is turning back time to remember the woman she is, the woman she was before. It is those who dance who best keep memory alive. When my friend asked if I knew how to cumbia, in the moment, I'd been out of practice. I'd forgotten the lesson a loved one, my mother, the sun, had taught me. So I danced with him the way wallflowers dance, quiet and timid, my blood only barely flickering, wishing for its flame. Later, another friend sends me an article that says there's a reason cumbia is one of the easiest dances to learn. The todo cumbia is popular everywhere. It originates in Colombia. The first people to do it did so in chains. Enslaved black folk couldn't lift shackled feet, so instead they shuffled and invented the cumbia. You can't tell me there aren't many ways to survive, to remember the dead, to make a freedom where there isn't one. It's cumbia. I try to read it a lot in San Antonio because I don't know for anyone listening, but I know for myself, I had spent most of my life seeing people who were not Black cumbia, and it wasn't until I learned that I realized that cumbia is a Black art form, like most art forms. Okay. I write a lot of poems about Black hair, so here's another one. You were once teenage purveyor of the white girl gospel, zealous pupil of the hot comb, of oily neck and folded ear. But before that, you were young. You were asked questions about your dead father and your hair, your first conversation with God, faithless, child of the singing forehead, child of the frustrated wrist. Your mother yelled because you fell asleep on your aunt's pillows and now the whole couch smells of you. Child of amorous pomade. Everyone can tell where you've been. Even bus windows remember your name. Child of the curl that stole the wind's fury. How could everything about you not be bursting? Child of the busted chongo. Child of the broken brush, splitting anything weak in half while still blushing for a gentle hand. You are your own lesson in commitment. Child of royalty, of the silk scarf before bed, defender from the cotton resurrected each night to steal you back, every pillowcase a looming field of ghosts. Child of the rained out funeral, child of grocery bag protection. At age 12, washing your own hair is your first act of humility. Listening to your Blackness, your first mode of resistance. Child of the eloquent scalp, which negotiations did you lose today? How many times did you lift your hands in ceremony to unravel and partition? Tell us how you learned to fix, fluff, and plait, to wind and plow, how you were late for class and work doing so, how you skipped breakfast, how you tended, how you greeted a new ancestor in the mirror and let their moans trickle and slither down the length of you, how each strand circles back to its own beginning. Child of inheritance, rejecting gravity and its theorem, the eternal, resilience. When the weather catches you unprepared, you curse each raindrop, undoing your labor with its disrespectful weight. But unlike anything else in the world, when smothered in water, submerged in a substance thick enough to kill you, nearly drowned and gasping, you rise, and refusing invisibility, grow to the size all benevolent gods are. That poem is called Invocation. I feel like most of the poems I'm sharing tonight and most of the poems that I've been trying to write lately have been trying to recover like 6-year-old Ariana, trying to find the affirmation and healing that she needed. And so towards that, I'm going to share one last spoken word piece and then go into some of the newer work that I've been writing. So I actually wrote this about my, I don't know where in San Antonio everyone is, but I'm from the South Side, but I finished going to public school in the North Side. We kind of lived all over the city. And so I went to Luna Middle School, and there were 4 Black kids in my Spanish class at Luna Middle School who were just really amazing. And so I wrote this poem for them. For the Black kids in my 8th grade Spanish class, for Eddie, T, Alexis, Michelle, island at the center of the room, dark utopia in the middle of middle school. When the girls I was friends with in 6th grade started bullying me in 8th grade, I stopped talking to them. In retaliation, they pushed me in the halls, shoved my books out of my hands, and talked shit, loud, in class, for everyone to hear. Worst of all, they made fun of my Spanish. So I drifted to sit with the Black kids, and it was there, in the classroom of Senora Quiñones, the 4 desks in the middle of the room, I could unveil my whole self without shame. For the group of people who helped find my natural rhythm, who taught me to trust it, to be Black and laugh with my whole body. For Alexis and Michelle, who laughed and showed every tooth, every time, who dragged joy from their lungs and threw their happiness in the air. When they reached you, you couldn't help but catch on and make the happy sounds too. For T, who chuckled at my jokes, wrote the lyrics to Roses by Kanye West in my notebook so I would fall in love with hip hop too. And for Eddie, the quiet brother taking notes in the back, who once shouted, "Where the hell is my pinche cuaderno?" So loud, all us Black kids shouted, then laughed till tears poured out like music notes. And there we were, filling the space with the sound of us again. The descendants of slaves have always been the kindest to me. Eddie and I were the only ones good at Spanish. The others were good at being free. Blackness, the gift my father gave me, is the most human thing I have ever been blessed to be. Bond that cannot be broken should we choose it over supremacy. I have never needed a country to love me, just Black people. I have never needed heaven, just Black people. Eddie, Alexis, Michelle, T, you gave me permission to love being Black. Who taught you to love the texture of your hair and the color of your skin, the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to love yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to love your own kind, the race you belong to, so much so that you only want to be around each other, to be what God gave you, beautiful because we chose to be, together because we're better that way? When I tell you no one in the world makes me laugh like Black people, makes me love like Black people, I mean it's the first thing people notice about me. It's the first prayer I wake to and the longest song I am grateful to sing. Should I ever be shamed inward for wearing a dark cloud on my head? Should I ever think myself better for being a lighter color? Let me remember the dark utopia from whence I come. Should I ever forget that Black people have demonstrated the greatest acts of humanity, of courage, that we are no one's second choice, that no matter where they put us on a map, we will find each other, create our own worlds, and they will be enough. Let us be enough. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I have a few more poems to read. I think I'm supposed to go until 7 o'clock Central Time. If y'all could maybe let me know when I'm getting close to time, that would be a great help. I used to do slam, and so I'm very good at timing my poems that are in like the 3-minute range for performance. But when I read work that is written for the page, I just have no concept of how long it takes to read that work. Okay, so I'm just gonna start reading poems from my manuscript, and when it gets close to time, I will stop. So let's do that. So I'm working on a full-length collection of poetry, and these are some of the poems from that. So this poem is called "How Many Güeros Does It Take to Kill Me?" The first day of first grade, 3 pencils and a set of hands I found in my hair. I'm sure something was whispered in Spanish. language in which there is no word to describe me with grace. Let's play a game called My School So Mexican. The entire third grade was required to sing and dance a Selena medley for our parents. If you went to Palo Alto Elementary School at the same time that I did, then you know what I'm talking about. My School So Mexican. We sold hot Cheetos with nacho cheese at fundraisers. My School So Mexican. Principal took my mama to the office, told her my hair was outlandish. My School So Mexican. I'm the only one who looked like me. Güero is not to be confused with gringo, the first meaning Spanish descended, meaning pale, meaning a Mexican who is white. The latter meaning American, usually white, although one can be both güero and gringo at the same time. You can have a tía güera, or a cousin everyone calls güerito. You can have a professor in your class who asks who has been called gringa by their cousins in Mexico. You can have neutral words to describe white people, just not to describe yourself. Negrita. This poem is from my cousin Micah. Playing loteria, I teach you to match word and picture, and your eyes dry from the stare. We inhale the colors, winking back at us. They taunt us. They will never give us a name like theirs. Your golden hand hovers, a nervous onlooker, and I fear you offer your heart to this language. Run your tongue along its teeth, looking for light. I lean into your shoulder to stop the sun from leaking between us. You and I are not mirages, neither are our ghosts. To survive here, mija, I work on the words, making a list of everything we are owed. Volver, volver. Y volver, volver to my grandmother's elementary, her inherited Spanish trickling through closed lips as the teacher instructs, English only. And my grandmother is an essay on shame, a trembling cursive I recognize but cannot read. Volver a tus brazos otra vez. Mexico, country fond of my grandparents' memories, says I glisten with a stranger's tongue, bullies my muscle into a lovely wreck, and I weep at my loss, curse the culture keeping me outside its beautiful fist. Llegaré hasta donde estés. 4 years of Spanish classes to remember the name of grandmother's tears, learning first to pronounce each syllable with the intent of a conquistador. If I deserve an origin story, is language the only one I know by name, not the place to begin? Yo sé perder, yo sé perder. Black as my braids, I am spoken to in English, the third tongue, final conquest, never recognized as Mexican in this country, never daughter of woman who hums mariachi songs in crowded restaurants, skimming lyrics in favor of tune. And all I want is permission to love the gaps in my lineage as one would the breaths in a favorite song. Quiero volver, volver, volver. Quise volver, volver. But I give the Spaniard back his crime, his wet murder, my half fluency. I choose to forgive the chaos violence left me. Quiero salir, salir, salir. To love no nation, to kiss my mirror with the mouth I own. I feel like part of the project of this manuscript that I'm working on is to take tropes and ideas that are very popular in, like, among Mexican Americans, and make folks aware of how some of these ideas are anti-Black, or in the way of us getting to liberation collectively. And so part of it is taking apart a lot of Gloria Anzaldua's investment in mestizaje. So I have a section of poems that are Borderland Suite, and then they have a different name after that. So this is one of the Borderlands poems. So this is Borderland Suite, Nightmares. 1. Frida weaves a ribbon through Selena's hair and whispers a joke in her ear. The shiny braids take form. From here, the two mestizas appear drenched in sunlight, their complexions a mystery, melting into each other. 2, Lauren and Brittany and Ashley and Desiree and Linda and Mickey kissed the boy I liked. My braids split from my scalp. Marcus says the name of that song translates to Dance of the Gorilla, and my family plays it at every party. I pray for a sister. I can't keep still. Mom yells, breaks a hairbrush on my head. Every Spanish word I learn is an insult. Anzaldúa whispers in my ear that she is not my sister, the F's hitting me like a hiss. 3, in someone else's nightmare, I fail at heterosexuality. I fail at expectations of my gender. I do not choose the güero. I choose something closer to freedom. I grow bigger. I learn to understand my own loneliness. I go see what parts of me are missing. I fill in the blanks. Okay, I think I have time to read maybe one more poem. So maybe this will be my last poem. Okay, so I'll read one in the Borderland Suite. It's called Borderland Suite Names. Oh, I can read until 7:05. Okay, great. We'll read a few more poems. So this is called Borderland Suite Names. Brown is my name. Brown was my father's name, and his before his, and his before his, and his before his. Before Brown was my name and my father's name, it was a white man's name. Brown is his name, not yours. Brown is the name of a slave owner. Brown is a color. Brown is the color of some of my family, not all. Brown is my name, not yours. Brown is the color I am no matter the season. I am brown, but I am not dark-skinned. Black is also my color. Black is also my allegiance. I am black, but I am not dark-skinned. Brown does not mean dark-skinned. Black power is my allegiance. Black is not my name, but it is my condition. Black people exist in every country. Black people exist in every country because of slavery, because of migration. Being black is different than being brown, though some people are both. Brown does not mean indigenous. Mexican does not mean brown. I am proud to be black. Black power inspired the brown berets, who were not all brown. Black power is fundamental. All black people are black regardless of ethnicity. Mexican is not a race, so there is no such thing as brown power. What raza? Mestizaje means Mexico without black people. Mexican is different from Mexican American. What do you mean? I am being perfectly clear. Okay, I just have two more poems and they're kind of short, so here we go. This poem is called Introductions. I'm Ariana, and I've been conquered. Child of Mexico, Africa, USA. I have someone else's name. I was born in a cemetery. In 1848, Frederick Douglass wrote an article condemning the US conquest of Mexico. I went to the Alamo on a field trip once. My uncle's dream is to own land. His Facebook photo is him atop a horse. This is not a joke. A boarder blew through me, hooked my great-grandmother's tooth, dragged the bones of Laredo south across the river. My great-grandmother's hometown is built on the bones of her ancestors. Pride is a strange violence. My great-grandmother's country had a black president in 1829, last name Guerrero, meaning warlike, soldier. My father was in the Air Force. He died flying. Try to tell me the wind don't speak. My father died before I was born. I talk to everyone's ancestors. I'm a cotton twirler, shapeshifter, grave digger. My curandera says the earth can transform anything. I be burying shit all the time. Okay, this is my last poem, and then we will get into the Q&A. So please save your questions that you had for Alain and have them ready to go when we get into the Q&A. Okay. This last poem that I'm going to read is called At the End of the Borderlands. And it's really me trying to imagine if we let go of the mestizaje that's in like borderlands theory, what is possible then? How can we imagine the path to liberation beyond that? One that includes everyone, liberation for everyone. At the end of the borderlands. We need new origins. Countries are killing everyone I love. From my cousin's lips, a wish for my safety. From my curandera's hands, rituals for healing. I simmered rosemary and drank its tea, grew my hair thick as a plague, spoke poems till my throat blistered and waned, and still could not curse colonizers enough to undo their work. No one I know has enough money to live, yet asks me if I've eaten. Before day's end, we feed each other our blackness, grow full from offering, our many tongues, studies, compassion, our wilderness and names. We run the length of country, reddening our feet, come to our own ends to face ourselves. What will we leave in our wake? Who we are now, our responsibility, our empty pockets, our humility or shame. Culture alone will not save us. Who are you without your country? What would you give? Would you fight for those you don't love, to whom you are indebted? Thank you. Those are all the poems that I have prepared for tonight. Yay, let's get into the Q&A. Oh, I think you're muted.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I was saying thank you so much, Ariana. There were so many lines that I wrote down, everything from when you were talking about no matter where you put us on the map, we will find each other, to the curl, and just thank you. That just really, it moved me. And you got me thinking also as a professor about mestizaje. In my class, we're about to start talking about mestizaje in the next week or two. So I will definitely keep in mind all the theories, all the framework that you're offering. I think it's really important. So I would like to now open it to Q&A, because I was watching the comments as closely as I could and also listening. And I know Jasmine's going to help me out here. So if you have questions, and I know you all do because I saw what y'all were posting, please ask your questions of Alain and Ariana. And I will go ahead and give you all a few seconds, maybe even a minute to think about your question. And I'm going to put one person on the spot. Sorry, Greg, where are you, Greg? Could you share in the comment, Greg, your story about Ariana's poem that you read in your high school? I think that would be a great question to ask at some point, but I see a question coming up now. So would you like me to read it, or would you all like to just respond? How do you all want to do it? I'll leave it up to you all.
Sure. I mean, I can read the question aloud and then respond to
it.
Okay. Yeah. First of all, thank you for moderating, and thank you to everyone listening and asking questions and really engaging with our work. Also, hi, Alain. It's good to see you. So the first question we have is from Lucero Saldana that says, Ariana, I think the question is asking, Ariana, have you thought of creating a K-12 lesson plan for your cumbia poem? It would be a beautiful way to teach literature, history, music, and dance. Thank you so much for asking that. I actually had not thought about that. I have lesson plans for some of my other poems, but I think this is a really great suggestion, and I will talk to educators. I've worked with educators to create other lesson plans, and I think you're right. I think it would be a great opportunity. So thank you for suggesting that. I will work on it. I will work on it. Yeah, thank you, Lucero. other questions you might have for myself or Alain? Oh, Professor Ramos, I think you're muted again.
Oh, I'm sorry. I keep muting myself and forgetting. So I was saying, thank you for catching that. I was saying to Alain, as I was listening to your poems and thinking about how empire was a recurring theme in some of the poems and settler colonialism, as I mentioned earlier, I'm about to teach that in my classes. And oftentimes teaching these subjects, I worry that students become dejected. You know, there's so much depletion that comes from domination. And I just wondered, how do we survive in this empire? How do we strike back but not lose ourselves in the process? I wonder if you have any, like, I don't know, words of wisdom in addition to your wonderful poems you can share with us.
Thank you for asking that, Profe Ramos. I think that sometimes when we think about empire, as far as in the US, we tend to go immediately to Europe creating an empire in what is now considered the US or Mexico. For example, I come from the Zapotec community, and we were named by the Nahuatls because they were trying to like colonize us. And I think it's really important to root empire not just at the level of the international, but also at the level of the domestic. Certain violences don't start with Europe. Certain violences start with human beings not being able to relate with each other. And I think that really started when we think about, for example, the Aztec Empire, right? There's a lot of pride in Chicano studies when we're studying the Aztec Empire, but we're not necessarily questioning how did the Aztec displace, for example, the Maya? Why are there Maya in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico? Why are there Maya in Guatemala, in El Salvador? Right? I think that if we root empire in home as opposed to empire as this big idea that is detached from home, we can get to questions. I think that empire, what it targets, a lot of people always go immediately to land. But what empire targets is relationships. If you can't have a relationship with other people, none of you can take care of the land. Relationships are first and then the land. That's how they get to land, by undoing kinship units. And that's why we need to talk about how we fail each other, but not necessarily center identities. We need to center each other. I think Ariana's poem, where Ariana writes, people can be Black and brown, and also Mexican is not a race, and mestizaje means Mexico without Black people. I think all of those are divesting from identity politics and centering to relationships, which is speaking back to empire. Because organizing around an identity, it's always going to fail because it's not getting to the relationality aspect.
Wow, thank you so much. I love being a student. I love learning, and I'm doing so much of that right now. So thank you. I see a bunch of questions in the comments. So I guess this is for both of y'all. So I'll go ahead and read it, and then if you both want to respond. So each of you exhibit very different politics between your early poems and essays and your more recent work. I'm wondering, as artists and people, how do you make space for your own growth in that regard?
Sure, I can jump in and respond to this question. Thank you for reading it. I think for myself, thinking about that question, and maybe this is also helpful for students encountering ideas that are new to them, that are important in shaping their politics, is that knowing something now that you didn't know before is not about your ego or your failure as a person. It just means now you know more than you used to. And that is a beautiful opportunity to do things differently now that you know something else that is important in shaping your politics and shaping your how you show up as in your kinship relations, as Alain was mentioning just now. And so I think when you learn more, you get to practice your way of being in the world differently. And if you are an artist, hopefully that shows up in your work as well. I do think I was telling my partner as I'm trying to work on these new poems in this manuscript, they are very different than some of the very early spoken word pieces that I started or used to perform with. And that's okay. It means I don't have to perform that old work anymore. And it also means that I want my politics to be very clear. That's one thing, right? Like once you know something that shapes your politics in a more useful way, be clear about that. Be loud about it. Because people who have those same politics or who are also looking to learn are going to find you. They're going to seek you out, but they won't know that you're there unless you're loud about it, unless you let people know so that others can learn as well. So that's my response.
Thank you, Ariana. I echo the being loud. One of the things that this question makes me think about is my own process in curating both of my collections. For example, in Intergalactic Travels, I include a poem in Zapotec. The poem was written many years before the book came out, and it was my first attempt at trying to relearn the language. I knew that the poem was grammatically incorrect because as soon as I finished it, I showed a couple of my friends who are fluent Zapotec speakers, and I was like, "Can you understand this?" And they were like, "No." And they taught me how to write it. But I thought it was really important for me as somebody who is reconnecting to include the messy version of Zapotec, because I think that this commitment that we have to being legible doesn't work when at the level of indigeneity and Blackness. So I intentionally included a poem in bad grammar in an indigenous language as a critique also to those who constantly, because of my Blackness, will not claim me as indigenous, then I'm presenting them something that is poorly done so they can critique it, but it's part of my methodology. And I think that now, if I were to do that again, sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe I should have actually just done the correct one so I could have been easily, not have to explain myself and easily be accepted. But, I think you can always go back between what you do and how you do it. And making space for my art now, I'm venturing a lot more into experimental work. Most of my work is already experimental. When readings like this, I read super like a regular poet, but if you actually encounter my work, it's nothing like what I just read right now. But yeah, I'm just trying to be out front that I'm a weird artist, and maybe in 6 months I'll stop performing regular stuff and actually showing my weird, really cool shit.
So the next question for the both of y'all is, as artists, how do you handle heartache, loss, and stagnation of creation?
I can answer this first. Yeah, this is a big question and kind of a hard question. How do you manage these feelings and experiences? I can say for myself, this question hits home just over the last few months. A lot has happened in my personal life around these things, and it's been hard to write. And so I think for me, it's a lot about trying really hard to be kind to myself, to remember that we live in a capitalist society. Like we live under global capitalism, right? And as subjects under global capitalism, as artists who have to produce art in a capitalist market, right? We have to sell art in order to make a living. So our art is never, the way we think about our art is often tied to production and value. and worth, and is there an audience for this, and is it going to be legible to an audience? And so when you have all these other questions that are about money and worth and production in your head, sometimes it's very hard to remember why you started creating in the first place, right? Because for a lot of people, it was never about the market when you started creating, right? It was about something that your spirit needed to do. And so, but sometimes, right, if your spirit is hurt, if your spirit is weary because it's experiencing those things that you mentioned, heartache, loss, then it can be difficult to create. And when it is difficult, the best thing you can do for yourself, and this is in my own experience, is to remember to be kind to your spirit, because the market is doing its own thing, right? The market never cared about your spirit to begin with. The market cared about the product. But as an artist, you are so much more than the product or the thing that you make or create, whether you sell it or not or whatever. So I think it's really, for me, trying to be kind to my spirit. What does my spirit need right now? If my spirit doesn't need to be writing poems, then I'm not going to. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. I think that for me, heartache, I can write when I have heartache. It's been for a long time, it was the only mode that I was able to write in. If I was happy, I would never be able to write poetry. If I was having a regular day, I wouldn't be able to write poetry. There used to have to be something sad. And I think that after learning that, I had to challenge myself to do something other than write when I was sad, to see if I could open up moments to write when I was happy. And that was a big shift because I wouldn't be able to do other stuff when I was sad. Like, I always wrote and it always made me feel better, but I just wanted to have a different relationship to writing. And as far as like how Ariana's talking about capitalism, I think that I never wrote to be part of like a poetry world. Like, I wrote because I was undocumented and I needed to process everything that was happening. My first book I wrote when I was living in between 3 states. It was such unstable, unlivable conditions where I wrote my first book. And I wasn't like, ooh, I'm gonna do this book and it's gonna be great. I was just like, I'm so lonely, and this is the only place that I can craft as a home, right? Like, my book for me became an infrastructure of home, outside of like not having a home because I was in between 3 states. So I think the method in which you approach writing has a lot to do with your social condition, but also, I don't know. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. So I think this is for you, Ariana. Do you want to read it and answer it?
Sure. So Diana Flores asks, what have been some of the reactions for calling Anzaldua's idea of mestizaje anti-Black? I think, and Alain can speak to this as well too if they want to, but I won't put them on the spot if they don't want to. Yeah, people are very resistant to hearing critique of Anzaldua. And I blame Chicano studies. I think that like Chicano studies, Mexican American studies has done a lot of work to, and maybe this is true for a lot of disciplines, right? Like whoever is considered the main figures or sort of, the main thinkers of that discipline, people sort of put them on a pedestal. And then you can't critique their ideas anymore, which is actually harmful. We should be able to critique ideas because it's not about tearing down on Anzaldua. It's about trying to push that theory so that it actually can help us lead to liberation. That's the goal, right? So yeah, I found that a lot of Mexican Americans, a lot of non-Black Mexican Americans have been very resistant to the idea that mestizaje is anti-Black. But when you really, all you have to do is look at the history of mestizaje in Mexico, and where Anzaldua got mestizaje from. Jose Vasconcelos, who was the Minister of Education in Mexico in the post-revolutionary period, right? And the whole idea of mestizaje was to create an idea of who the quintessential Mexican citizen would be. right? And so if you're thinking about that, we have to think about our relationships to citizenship, to nation, to nationhood. And if we find those relationships in tension, then we need to question that relationship. What is our investment in citizenship? What is our investment in creating the ideal Mexican citizen? And who does that leave out? Often it's Black and Indigenous people or Afro-Indigenous people. And so if we understand that to be a problem, then critiquing Anzaldúa becomes like a non-issue, then it's like, okay, what conversation can we have after this? And so I would hope that people are more willing to hear critique, and to also study. If someone critiquing Anzaldúa, frustrates or bothers you in some way, then maybe it would be helpful to research and study why you're invested in mestizaje, study its history, study what it's done, study who the proponents of it have been and who the people arguing against it have been, and then come to your own conclusion. I think a lot of my work is trying to get people to consider, to keep learning, that investment in learning, I think, is one of the best things you can do.
Thank you. Alain, would you like to also answer that question?
I mean, I think Ariana pretty much hit it on the spot. As far as personal experiences, I think that when I teach, sometimes I teach in Chicano studies, sometimes I teach in Native American studies. Whenever I'm teaching in these departments, one of the things I noticed is that for students who are like traditional students, like 18 to 22 years old, for students in that age range, sometimes Anzaldúa is the first Mexican-American writer that they meet. And because she's the first or the only one, they latch onto in this sense of like, how can I critique the only person I know? Like that would then mean that I don't know anybody, right? And I think they're more scared of they don't know enough than of actually like the arguments, which says something about our education system, right? And how we're continuously failing them and failing other writers, because there's so many writers of Mexican descent out there. And one other thing is, like, it's a disservice not to critique and be in dialogue with each other. Because we're putting out ideas of places where we're at, knowing that we know what we know and we don't know what we don't know. Like all writers know that that our writing is limited. And for somebody to be like, you can critique this, is for somebody to say, you can't hold them like as a person, like we can't make Messiah complexes. Angela Davis talks a lot about the failures of like putting so much on one single like activist or one single writer. You have to be kind. Like we're not gonna get everything right, and also we're gonna continuously change. And it's important to know that Anzaldúa passed because she didn't have health care. Maybe her ideas would have changed if she had been cared for. We also don't know that.
Wow, thank you all. I think we have time for one more question before we wrap it up. So I'm sorry for all those whose questions we couldn't answer, but we'll try one more. I'll go ahead and read it for both of you all. Social capital is often elitist. How do you negotiate speaking your truth in elitist spaces, or do you avoid it? I feel like, Alain, you were kind of addressing this question earlier when you were talking about being, your own weird self versus like, is this kind of speaking to that question in a way?
Yeah, I can speak to this. Oh my gosh, I think I get critiqued a lot from like everyone in the poetry world because they're like, you're supposed to have radical politics and you're publishing in mainstream places. And for part of it, it's like, yes, I am publishing in mainstream places. One, because I need money and I would rather publish in a mainstream place than I have worked like I've had every kind of job you can imagine, you know? I've worked in the prep of a restaurant. I've worked as a waiter. I've worked like flipping pizzas. And I'm just like, if I can do something else that will help me have more time for writing, I will do it. Because for me, it's not so much about where I publish. It's like, okay, what do I do with the work? Yes, I might publish in a journal that nobody's buying, but I have a pretty large like internet trace. I put everything on the internet. It's just like these people are just paying to be like the ones that were like, oh, we publish it first, but it's like nobody's gonna read it. And I don't really care about like it being printed somewhere. I care about, am I sharing it? And I'm a teaching artist. I do most of my writing work, most of my poems that I have ever written, I've written while teaching workshops. And a lot of my poems are community based. And as far as performing, so I mainly say no to reading at bookstores because reading in bookstores is predominantly white audiences who are neoliberal. I have a very hard no for bookstores unless it's like people of color owned, or if it's in like a hood that I've like been in and have like, no people around that I can be like, oh, come through. I also try not to read at university libraries. That's a hard no. Because university libraries, it's usually academics assigning things for class, and I don't want to just feel like I'm being dissected for a paper. I will say yes to like other university or museum spaces that I know are invested in community. But yeah, I also have a rule of I always ask who else is reading, and if I'm the only Black person, it's a hard no. I recently, for Latinx Heritage Month, I started, whenever I'm in panels, if there are no dark-skinned Black folk, it's also a hard no. So yeah.
Thank you. Ariana, would you also like to answer the question? It's social capital is often elitist. How do you negotiate speaking your truth in elitist spaces, or do you avoid it?
Word. Yeah, thank you for all that you said on this, Alain. Because I was trying to think about how to answer this question. I mean, I should say that most of my training, I put training in quotes because, you know, what is that? There was no formality to my training. I came up doing poetry in community poetry spaces. So since I was 16 years old, I've been performing. I performed at the Luminaria Arts Festival in San Antonio, and I performed as a youth poet in San Antonio, Austin, and Houston. And that was my introduction to the poetry world. It was very much anti-elitist spaces. It was very much how can we bring poetry to the people. Most of the shows that I did when I began were outdoor events at San Antonio, because San Antonio loves to have outdoor poetry events. For what reason, I don't know. With, you know, whole families in the audience. So the audience was never sort of like a young college student. And so that was my training for the first, I would say, 5 or 6 years that I performed. That was who I performed for. And so it's also who I'm most comfortable performing for. And I learned to be myself in front of that audience. So now whenever I enter any space, I'm still myself because that was my training. That was how I learned to perform and to be in front of people with poems. And so whether or not the space honors that is a whole different thing that doesn't have anything to do with me or what I'm bringing to the space. And so I feel like maybe even especially in elitist spaces where I think my ideas or my politics or my body will not be well received, I often go above and beyond to be even louder about all of those things in those spaces because they invited me. So they're going to get all of me.
Thank you. I hate to say it, but time is up. And this was an amazing event. There's so many lines that will stay with me. There's so many themes. I love the constant, the abuela and the mothers, and even Ariana's bio, high key, the youngest abuela. And I was thinking of a piece by Dr. Sandra Gonzalez. She writes about abuela epistemologies. And in November, we're going to have an event on that. And I thought this is perfect. I love how our first teachers, like Alain was saying, your mother was your first poetry teacher. Our first teachers, and I think our best teachers, are the mothers and the grandmothers. So thank you for the ode that you both gave to them and just everything that we've learned today. This was an amazing, amazing event. For your emotional labor, for your intellectual labor, for sharing your stories and allowing us to be part of them in this moment. We're forever grateful. I also want to give a shout out to David and Crystal, our American Sign Language interpreters, for their awesome, awesome work. I know that is also difficult work. So thank you for signing for us tonight. And thank you to our behind the scenes guru, Jasmine Munoz. She makes the Mexican American Studies program at SAC so much better. I've learned so much from her. And yes, everything that went well tonight is all Jasmine's doing. So big, big shout out to Jasmine. We do have one quick announcement about a giveaway. So we are giving away a copy of Ariana Brown's Sana Sana and Alain Pelaez Lopez's To Love and Mourn in the Age of Displacement. So if you would like to enter our giveaway, please go to our Instagram and look for that information on there. So again, if everyone in the comments, please share your love, share your joy, tell us what this event meant to you. And again, it was an honor and it was a pleasure. Alain and Ariana, thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you all, everybody, for participating. This was wonderful.